Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ray. Appreciate that. And with the class, again, this is a class that I've prepared. I love the topic. And as I'm sharing it with you, it's really about you and what you're hearing and what you're understanding. First of all, if you can hear me well, raise your hands. All right, good. I can see that everybody's raising their hand, so that's good. If I say something, go ahead and let them down. If I say something it doesn't make any sense to you, I said it's screwy, or you just didn't hear it well, feel free to raise your hand. Again, this is about something that I'm bringing to you to share with you because I'm excited about it. And if you don't hear it or don't understand it, that doesn't do you any good. So feel free to stop me at any point and say, okay, wait a minute, I didn't understand that, and then I'll go back over it. So tonight's first class is on the name of God. Raise your hands if you have an idea of what God's name is. All right. You think I'm leading you. This may be a trick. Go ahead and let your hands down. So we're going to see if you indeed do know what the name of God is. And we'll go through this, and then afterwards you can tell me, yep, had it all along, or didn't know that that was it. So we can go from here. So up front, you actually see the Hebrew name of God, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here in just a minute and what it means. So first of all, what is my name? Cameron. Yeah, that's right, Cam or Cameron. Because every time we connect with people, the first thing we do, we ask someone's name and we tell them our name. It's about introductions. And so I'm Cameron. It's great to meet you guys. And this is about names in the name of God specifically, because in the conversation, names are always a great starting point. Now I'm going to ask the question, where does our Creator introduce himself? I may ask questions. Feel free to throw them out there.
In Exodus, where he says, "I am who I am."
That's one. It begins introductions with us in Genesis 1, right? When it tells us that God is the one who created the earth, and God is the one who made the animals, and God is the one who made man. And so that's the beginning of our exposure to God and to him representing himself both in name and form. And one of the first ways he introduces himself to us is by actually creating us in his own image. We're created with a purpose to show him. So one way of thinking about it is when we introduce ourselves to other people, we're revealing ourselves to other people and helping them come to know who we are. So we are going to get to Exodus 3, where there's an introduction, and that's the actual core of the class, because he goes beyond the basic introduction and begins to express himself in a much greater depth. So that was a great answer. Another question I have is, do you believe that our Creator intends his name to be known to us? Just guess. Yes?
Yes.
If you think God wants, because there are some who kind of have a vague idea of who God is. They know he's a creator and that he's everywhere and that he knows everything. But at a personal level, does God want us to know him and know his name? And there's a reason I'm asking that question. And it comes from an understanding of how the Hebrew works. And then the question about where does our Creator proclaim his holy name is, in fact, Exodus 3:14. What is the common title or common name that we call our Creator? Yahweh. That's one. What is another common one that people refer to him by? Adonai. What's that? Adonai was one. What's another? Elohim. Some say Jehovah. Sometimes we just say God. Sometimes Lord. Right? All of those things are used to refer to our Creator and our God, and all of those things have reason that we use them. So today is going to be a little bit of discussion about that. So when we use the word God, what is that? And I'm going to start there. I'm not going to cover all the names, but I'm going to go to one in particular. When we use the word God, why do we use that word? Any thoughts? So, it's always good to ask the question. So a lot of times I ask myself question. When I started this study, I was actually in the process, and still am, of transcribing the Bible. And as I do that, I have the choice or the option to change a couple of things. Now, I'm not going to change the text, but one thing I'm sensitive to is the fact that a lot of things in the English aren't actually representative of what's intended in the original text. So one of those examples is the word God. Now, what does the word God itself mean? If I were to look up the word God in a dictionary, what would it tell me? Can anybody guess?
Something with creator, with power, to give you the power.
Yeah, it's the idea around having power, authority. Deity is the best word. I heard that said. Deity is the best expression. And when we start thinking about what constitutes deity, it's quite important, because there are many different religions from many different cultures around the world that believe that there were one or many deities. Like the Greek system believed that there's Zeus and Athena, and that, you've got all of these gods. And that's actually what they would be referred to in our language, because God has in it this idea of a being that has its own power, its own authority, and its own scope of and range of abilities. So when you talked about the Greek gods, each one of them was a god of something. When you look at the Bible, there are many cultures who believe that there was a god of the mountains and a god of the rivers and a god of the valleys and a god of the sun and a god of the clouds. There's a god for everything, right? And in their view, if something existed that had form or movement or something made things happen, they had to attribute a god to it as being the source of power and authority. So the word God, while it's meaningful to us as believers, is a very generic term to describe a being of authority and power. Now, what does God say about how many gods there are? Only one, right? He says, there are no other gods. I know not one. I am alone God. So when he says that, he's not saying, look, let's frame it a different way, and I'm going to get to that. The word God, by the way, comes from about 3,700 references to the word that actually underneath it is Elohim. So when you think of the word Elohim representing God, it's actually the word literally that means God. And Elohim is used for God in reference to our God. It's used for God in references to false gods. And it's also used to represent men in authority. There are a couple of times where there's a governor or there's some person in a position of authority who in the Hebrew, the word Elohim is used. Now, El is mighty one. Elohim is a plural form of it. But the Elohim plural form word is used in singular expression. And what I mean by that is there are a class of words in the Hebrew that while the word itself is plural in form, the use of the word is in singular form. So Elohim, used almost 3,000 times with reference to God, is not saying that God is plural. It's saying that his scope, his scale, our understanding of him changes all the time. And as such, the plurality is used as an expression of how profound and how great and how he always changes in our eyes. But when God speaks of himself, does he say that he's always changing?
No.
What's he say about himself?
I change not.
I change not. The distinction is when I was 5 years old, the God that I knew doesn't look like the God that I knew when I was 25, and certainly doesn't look like the God that I know now at 50. So in my eyes, he's changed a lot, but God never changed. It was only my ability to comprehend and my experience with him and a relationship with him. It has grown and changed over time. So one of the things the Hebrew language does is on things that may appear to us to change, but are never really different, that they take on a plural form. And it's important because there are a lot of people who are confused by the plurality of the Hebrew word. but the way it's used is in a singular way. So when you look at almost all of matter of fact, there are only 4 times in the entire Hebrew Bible where the Elohim is used in a plural form. All of the rest are singularly emphatic uses in the scripture in well over 3,000 references. So that tells you the translators look at the word and they know it's a singular form because our God is one God. And that's what the Hebrews would tell you, the Jews would tell you the same thing, is that they worship one God and they know his name, or actually they know his, the word for God is Elohim. So we're going to talk about Lord. That's another word that comes up and is used a lot in the scriptures. Now, does anybody know when the word Lord is used in, especially the Old Testament? What the word underneath it is? Oh, I just said that, didn't I? Ha. Anybody want to throw it out there? What is the word that translators are translating from when they say Lord in all caps?
Yahweh.
Yeah, it's Yahweh. So generally, you'll find that there are 2 or 3 ways the Lord is spelled, and one of them is all caps. One's all caps with emphasis. In other words, it's even bigger. And then there's Lord with a capital L, and you can get Lord in lowercase. And I would tell you that growing up all my life and thinking of the Lord God, I have this natural kind of affinity for the word Lord. But in my research, I'm trying to figure out how I was going to write God's name in the text. I had to dig a little deeper on this, and I found some things that I think are very profound and very informative, and it changed my view on how I see God and how I see his name. And so we're going to go into that here in a minute. That's what I'm going to share with you. But I want to share something that caught me by surprise as well. So there's an Englishman. He's, I think, a general in their military, or he's a high position in the British military once upon a time. And his last name was Cavendish. And so he was a lord. So, of course, he goes by Lord Cavendish. Now, I'm going to ask you, what is his name? His last name. It's right there. Cavendish. What is his title?
Lord.
Lord. Yeah, it's not his first name, is it? Lord in this case is not a name at all. It's a title. And it represents a particular kind of authority in a particular kind of system. So I'm going to ask a question before we go any further. Oh, don't want that to happen yet. This is okay. Never mind. I'm gonna let that go. Who wrote the first English Bible that was put into mass production? Who had it written?
James.
Yeah, his name is James, and he was a king. So the old King James was sponsored by and authored by British subjects, right? Masters of theologies and men of renown in their ability to translate, but they were British. And the British system of royalty is a very well-known, constructed British system of royalty. It has a hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy is the king. If the king marries a woman who is not of royalty, she becomes a queen consort as wife of the king. If they have children, they're princes and princesses. They can have people who are of royalty who are dukes or duchesses, or they can bring them and give them land and give them titles. Under that is marquis or marchioness. Then you have earl and countess. Below that is viscount and viscountess. And you can have lord and lady. Now, I'm going to call your attention to this because this is a hierarchy. Who is higher, the king or the lord? The whole class should be in on this. Who's highest, the king or the lord? Who's lowest in the hierarchy? So the king, King James, who's sponsoring the construction of the first English Bible into mass production, is paying people to figure out how to translate the Bible. And when they give God a title, they give him the title Lord. Do you see what's going on there? Why would somebody in a hierarchy, in a British royal hierarchy, give God the title Lord?
Because they don't want anyone to think anyone is above them.
Well, yeah, maybe. I just saw that. It sent shivers down my spine. I know where Lord has its origins, and it's not, I don't mean from the British system. I mean from the biblical system. There has been a time where the Jews have tried to avoid using the literal name of God because they felt like it was too holy to write. And so they used Adonai a lot of times, or what we get as Jehovah is actually Yahweh combined with Adonai. And they did that so that if they wrote the name of God and then something happened to that text, it wouldn't be destroying his name in written form, which to them, they got to thinking, well, maybe that would profane God's name, and we don't want to profane his name. And the word Adonai means sovereign, but in some languages can come out like Lord. But as a rule, the word Adonai in the Old Testament text is not translated to Lord unless it's in combination with other names of God at one time. So there's kind of a link there. But the only other thing that stands out to me is English translators chose to give God a title, and the one they chose wasn't king. It was Lord. And to me, that goes back to what one of you just said a minute ago. It strikes me as wanting to make sure he wasn't high on their hierarchy of royalty. And that blows me away. Now, the other thing, Lord can be used in common use for several things, especially in the scripture and the culture of the days. If you were a head of a household, you were Lord of the house or Lord of the manor. When a visitor came, we see in Abraham's day, visitors came, and he called them Lord. And he had his wife prepare a meal of slaughtered a lamb and, prepared a big meal for them because they were visitors to his house. So he elevated them. Landowners are oftentimes called lords, especially by the people that they're master over. And generally, whether a person is titled or not, if they have authority over you, they become your lord. And Lord is used as a title to show respect by elevating others. And that's cultural. That's not in our culture, but that's been in other cultures, including the Hebrew culture of the day. So you didn't have to be over somebody for someone to elevate you and to esteem you and call you Lord, or something that would be the equivalent of Lord. So we're going to go now to Exodus 3, and we're going to read verses 13 through 15 so we can see where it comes from and what it says. So somebody who would like to read Exodus 3, verse 13 through 15. Anybody with a good voice, just jump out there.
Then Moses said to God, behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, the Lord the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations.
All right. So just to pay attention, because I believe that's probably the King James, is that very, very last statement. Remember I asked the question a minute ago about whether God intended for his people to know his name? Yeah. At the very end, verse 15, he says, "This is my memorial name, the name by which you shall know me for all generations." So the question I'm going to ask is, does God want us to know his name?
Yes.
Absolutely. Because he told Abraham what it was, Moses what it was. And he told him, not only am I going to tell you the name so you can tell the people, but I want you to tell the people that this is my name so that they will know my name for all generations. Right? Does that include us?
Yes.
Yes. I'm going to ask you again because I think it's too late in the day and not enough coffee. Does that include us?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, absolutely it includes us. So it's important we know that. The funny thing, however, is I've had the privilege of working with people in many different languages, and what I find are that many times people, their names in my language don't mean what their names mean in their language. And I would tell you that you can bet that if we're getting the name after it's gone through, from Hebrew, through Greek, through Latin, and then into various versions of English, and on top of that, people are kind of masking the name because they're afraid if they spell it out, that it will profane God's name if it's destroyed, that we might not actually have the name we need to have. So when God says, "I am who I am," starting in verse 14, and then he also says, when you talk to the people, tell them that I am has sent you to them, right? The English is I am, and that's because the name is a Hebrew name, right? And here's something that's true about the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, the names have meanings, and the names have meanings for different reasons, right? So if you get to Jacob's name, and this is in Genesis, it runs about Genesis, I want to say 31, and Jacob basically buys his brother's birthright, and then a little later, Jacob deceives his father and gets the blessing from his father. And when Esau finds out that Jacob took his name, he says, "Is he not rightly named? For he has deceived me these 2 times." Right? Now, guess what Jacob or Jacob in the Hebrew means?
Deceiver and supplanter.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It means he's the deceiver and the supplanter. Now, a supplanter means someone who takes the place of another person, right? A deceiver, well, we know what that is. Raise your hand if you like working with deceivers. Not good. I didn't expect to see any hands, and we're good. So, but the point of that is, in the Hebrew, it's common for a parent to name their child a name on the basis of either acknowledgement of a blessing. So, Rachel would say, "I'm going to name him Benjamin because he's going to be the right hand of his father," which is a blessing. Or you get these things through the scriptures where God even renames people. So he named Solomon, gave him another name, Jedediah, which means God is with me. Although we never see Solomon called Jedediah after the naming because he kind of didn't keep up the right relationship with God. In the New Testament, we see that those who are raised up to righteousness are given a new name. We even see that Jesus was given a new name. So we all think of Jesus the Messiah, but we know in Philippians 2 it says, "And God raised him up above all authorities and gave him a new name." So this idea of names being expressive of either our hope of who someone is or our assertion of who someone is important. So when God reveals himself to Moses, he's telling him his name not just because he wants to know what name to call him by, but because his name means something. And really, by the time you get English translation, and I'm going to explain why, you're kind of pecking at what the name means, because the translators are trying to limit it to what it's saying, right? They're not trying to give us the full meaning of it. They're trying to provide us a bullet point name, because they know we're talking about names. Because if you say my name, what's my name again? Cam, okay. It just means Cam. It's just a moniker. It's a little abstract thing. It doesn't mean anything, and it's not intended to in our culture. But in their culture, it can have profound meanings. So that's one thing. I'm going to say one other thing now, because I can't actually see my notes, so I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. The other thing that's true about the Hebrew language, which is very important and is relevant to this discussion, is that as a translator, the objective is to take what's said and say it in a new language. And Western translators, particularly English, German, and other forms, we have very precise languages. And while our language can be quite confusing to foreigners, because there are a lot of different rules, a lot of different exceptions, because they have a lot of different stuff that's stuffed into them, we still want very precise language. And that's what allows me to speak very quickly to you, because what I say usually is only going to have one particular meaning, right? I'm not giving you the obscure statements that can have 10 different interpretations. But the Hebrew language is a much more generous language in terms of meaning. And what I mean by that is a lot of things are said in the Hebrew language that can have multiple meanings. And that's why I don't argue with people about a lot of interpretations, because I'm thinking they've got one leg of it and they may be very right, and I may have another leg of it and mine may be right too. So instead of fighting over what it's saying because I don't agree with another person, I recognize that the language is flexible enough to say one thing and mean 4 or 5. And with respect to God's name, this is one of the cases where this happens. So the I am who I am comes from the Hebrew word hayah. Now, it's actually written in reverse, but it doesn't matter, because it's hey, yod, hey. And if I flip that, it becomes hey, yod, hey. And there's there's no meaning to the ability to flip it. But one of the things that's important about hayah is the first letter is actually called hey. And the last letter is hey. But hey is an interesting letter because it actually has a particular meaning. The word is interesting as well because it actually has a specific meaning. But the hayah in this case means I am. But the whole name of God, when he's saying I am who I am, is not one hayah, it's rather 2. So if you look at the third line I've got here, it's hayah. This word in the middle is, actually I'm backwards. The first word is hayah. The word in the middle is asher. And the third word is hayah. And what's interesting in this form is this asher is a joining word. It means agreement, success. It means within, right? And what he's actually saying is hayah within hayah. And hayah means I am. So he's not saying I am who I am. He's saying I am within I am. And that's kind of interesting by itself, because but what actually comes from is not I am, but the word is literally to be. So this word right here, the hayah, literally means to be, and this actually literally means to be within, to be, or the to be in Hebrew has an emphasis on existence. So to be in our language kind of means will be, right? And sometimes it's translated will be. And there's even a speculation that God is saying, instead of I am who I am, is saying I will be who I will be. But what's interesting is the to be in this sense actually means existence within existence. And it's an emphatic form. So if you read up and research on what the rabbis and linguistic experts of Hebrew say, they're saying God is saying, I exist within my existence. In other words, he's saying, I'm the only one who exists. Or in another way, in English to say it, I am the existent one. And that's one of the first implications of the name, is that God, when he says, I am who I am, is asserting to Moses, I'm the one who exists. And what Moses would be hearing is not just that God exists, but that he's the only one who exists. In other words, he is the creator, and everything he creates comes from him. He is the one who exists. Everyone else is a product of his creation. We don't exist in that sense. In that sense, we are given existence, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying? So he's hearing this word, and he's asked God, what is your name? What am I going to tell them who you are so that they'll know who you are? And he's saying, I'm the one who's created everything. I'm the existent one. I created you too. And it's even deeper than that. But what's interesting, and I'm going to share this here, is that when the translators start talking about the I am who I am, one of the conversations they have is, well, there's no lock on tense. The to be actually seems future. I am seems current. And we don't know which one it's supposed to be. And that's because it's written in Hebrew, not English. I'm thinking you have an expert in the Hebrew language who is a Hebrew speaking, living in the Hebrew culture, and they say, well, the answer isn't one or the other, it's both. In fact, the same rabbis and experts of the law and of the text say, rather, putting it in the emphatic form removes the tense from it, and God is saying, not only that I am to you, but I will be to someone else. And he's also told us he doesn't change. And in another place he says, 1,000 years are like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. And the conclusion they come to is he's not only expressing his existence, but that he doesn't exist in a time. His existence spans time. His existence is across the time of Adam for us. It's already in the kingdom age for us. He isn't locked, progressing through time like we are. And that's one of the things he's telling us, right? Is that I am in all time and in all places. And that has some very, very interesting suggestions. So then what we get out of this form of this name is that our Creator is asserting his infinite, immortal, and singular existence, from whom all other things come. And that's quite substantial. And that's what Moses, one of the messages Moses was going to go tell the people, is that the Creator, the one God across all time, is the one who sent me. The very one who gives you life is the one who sent me. Right? So it behooves you to listen, right? And that's what he's going to tell them. It behooves you to listen because he's the one that has your life in his hands. So if we can read Revelation 4:8, let's get another volunteer to read Revelation 4:8.
I'll read it. Then it will be, if they do not believe you, nor heed the message of the first sign, that they may believe the message of the latter sign.
Is that Revelation 4:8?
Revelation.
Revelation, I'm sorry. No, I'm still in it.
I've done that before, but I was like...
Let's go to the last one. This Revelation is last.
Yeah, I know.
We'll just go ahead.
Well, I guess I'll look it up. I thought I had it, is why
It's okay. That's okay. So read it out loud.
okay. 4:8, you said?
Yes.
Okay. The 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within, And they do not rest day or night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come.
Now, here's an interesting thing. This particular book, Revelation, was written in Greek, right? But they're calling God by name. And the way it's heard in the Greek is that he's the God who was, the God who is, and the one who is to come. Now, that's interesting because the very name God asserts to Moses is, I am the one who is, and at the same time, I am the one who is to come. And at the same time, the verse we talked about a minute ago, and I don't change. Therefore, who I was, who I am, and who I will be is the same, right? And this happens several times in Revelation 4:8 when God is expressly referred to by that name, by the one who was and who is to come. And there's a couple other references. I think there's one other reference in the New Testament. And what I would suggest to you is when that comes out, it's actually a verbal expression of God's literal name, because his name means, the one who is in all time, in the past, in the now, and in the future. And we talked about the translator dilemma, wanting very precise, descriptions, when the Hebrew is quite generous in its meanings. But I just want to leave you with that on the timelessness of God, that he was, he is, and he is to come, not at different times, but all now. All now. So our Creator is in all time, even the now. So it's interesting because we tend to think of God from the point of reference that we're moving through time, right? But God is not moving through time. He's in all time in that sense. So now the next thing I found quite interesting, when I was looking into rabbinical studies and a lot of their thinking on the name of God and whatnot, one of the things I discovered was that God's name, the Hayah, is it's a transform. And I don't know enough about the Hebrew language to explain it well, but basically in different forms, a word can show up in different ways. Now this is kind of dangerous because in the English language, I can pull up the word two, or two, and you don't know which one I'm talking about unless it's in context, because all three words, two and two, look almost the same. The other two doesn't look the same, but sounds exactly the same, but all three words are completely different. They have no relationship to each other. So it's tricky to get into a language and pick out two words that are similar and think that they might have connection, because that doesn't hold true. But in this particular case, Hayah and Hava are very, very closely related through a root. And depending on the context you use it, you can use one or you can use the other. Now, in modern day Hebrew, this doesn't hold true, but in ancient Hebrew, apparently it did. And it has some interesting implications, and I'm going to show you why. So where these rabbis are looking at the Hebrew language and they're playing with it, they see the Hayah and Hayah and know there's a direct transform between Hayah, which we talked about, the word to be or existence, is directly connected to the word Hava. So where we see the A, that's Asher here, where we see Hayah, Asher, Hayah, we can also pull out Hava, Asher, Hava. And that has some interesting implications. As we discussed, Hayah, Asher, Hayah is an emphatic expression of God's existence, both in the past, in our current time, and in the future, and the implications of him as the creator of all other things. But Hava is the Hebrew word to breathe. So literally, it's a verb, it's action, and it means to breathe. So that becomes real interesting when you look at the word Hava, Asher, Hava, because that form is an emphatic form. And so the suggestion then you get with the rabbis talking about, okay, what is the implication of the emphatic form of to breathe? And it's quite interesting because where they conclude, and this is looking at quite a few sources, what they conclude is the emphatic form of to breathe is to assert the source of all breath. So what God is saying by his name having this meaning in it is that he's the breath from which all breath comes and from which all breath returns. Now, this isn't particularly surprising, although I find it very exciting. If God starts by saying, I'm the existent one across all time, the one who's given you your very life, and from me comes all breath, and to me returns all breath. And that's part of his name. And to me, that really starts exciting me. Let me ask the question. What is one thing that all living things, whether they be flowers or trees or humans, fish in the sea, what do they all have in common?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. They all breathe. They all respirate. They all breathe. God is saying that all life, all of the living comes from me. All living things come from me, right? Not just that I created them, but they have their very essence in breath. In their breath is in me. And so he is emphatically the breath of all life. Now, when God created man in his image, in his form, what did he do after that? That's in Genesis 2:7. What's the next thing he did after creating him in his own image?
He breathed into him the breath of life.
He breathed into him. Yeah, exactly. He breathed into him the breath of life. He part of God, who he is this breath. And he breathed into Adam. It's like Adam took into himself part of the very being of God. And so do we when we breathe. And all life breathes. So breath comes from and returns to our Creator, right? So that to me is very exciting. So all breath comes from him, all breath returns. Let's look at Ecclesiastes 3:18 for a second. And this is interesting because Solomon was a bright guy, right? The greatest wisdom of all mankind. And he makes a couple of comments, and the comments are worth repeating. So let's have another person who hasn't read yet read that out. Ecclesiastes 3, verses 18 through 21.
I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place. All came from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward, and the breath of the beast ascends downward to the earth?
Okay, so they all are made of the dirt, of the dust, and they all share the breath. That's the constitution of man, and that's the constitution of animals. He says, man has no preeminence or no advantage over the animals. They're all made the same way. The only real difference is whether or not you believe in God and whether or not God redeems you from the certainty of death. But the point I want to bring out there at the very end is quite interesting. Solomon is asking a question. Who knows whether the breath of man goes up and the breath of the animal goes down? And you know, Solomon knows the answer to that question. Where does the breath of man return when he dies?
God.
And if the breath of man comes from the same place as the breath of animals, then where does the breath of animals return to when it dies? God. Because all breath of all living come from God, and all breath of all living return to God. You see, he's not posing a mystery to those who know the name of God. And the answer to the question is, neither one of those is right. The breath doesn't go up. The breath doesn't go down. The breath goes to God. He's drawing the attention of the believer to the question. to answer it the right way. We're supposed to be paying attention, right? And that's what he's saying. And that to me is interesting, because you see, he's testing his reader as they read his text. So here's the name we know. Now that first line, I'm not asking you to know how Hebrew is written. That is Hey, Yod, Hey. Okay? Hey is Haya. Emphatically the existent one. Now the second one we talked about is it has a Vav in the middle. That means this is Hey, Vav, Hey, Hava. Okay? And so God in the first form is asserting that he is the existent one from whom all life comes. In the second form, he is emphatically asserting that all breath and life come from him. And here's something that happens that's very interesting. God is the immortal sustainer of all life across all time. And these two words become a conjunction. They join the two words together. And what happens when they join the two words together is they form the word we call Yahweh. So when we can say Yahweh, but actually the word is Yod He Vav He. It has a soft W sound in the Hebrew, which to our ears is a V, right? But the translators, oops, I did that to myself. The translators, I just wanted to highlight it. Silly me. The translators have translated it into Yod He Wah He, just out of convention, because the first interpretation into a modern language was done in German, and the W in German sounds like a V. And that's the convention that leads us to Yahweh. Yod He Vav He would be proper. And so I'm going to leave you there for just a second. We're almost finished with the class. But this is the Hebrew name of God in Exodus 3:14 and 15, because God starts saying, I am who I am, which is Haya. It has the implication of Hava, the breath that is within the breath. That's also in the name. And later he then goes to say, and this is the name by which you shall know me. In the English it says, the Lord God, but that is Yahweh or Jehovah or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, right? Elohim, the Elohim of your fathers, Abraham, the Elohim of your father, Isaac, and the Elohim of your father, Jacob. But God goes from this with the implication of this, right? He goes from the beginning, the I am, with the implication of the breath, and he's the one that then gives us the final name in its final form, which is Yod He Vav He. And that, to me, is amazing when you see that all those things implied in his name actually come out in the name Yod He Vav He that we have written 5,700 times in the Old Testament. So one more thing, we're getting to the end of the class here. There are 5 letters. All the Hebrew letters are truly consonants, right? They have something else called a gimel, which is a series of dots to help people understand how the particular letter is pronounced in context. But it's an addition to the letter. The core letter or the core alphabet does not have gimels. It's an add-on to help people understand how to pronounce it later. So this one is just this. It's the Yod, and it's a breathing sound. There are 5 consonants of the Hebrew letter or Hebrew alphabet that are breathing sounds. Another one of the breathing sounds is Vav, which would just be the line and the quip at the top. This bottom piece is a gimel. Then there's a Hey, right? It's a breathing sound, and it actually, as a single letter, represents breath in Hebrew. So Hey, Vav, Hey, and Hey, Yod, Hey, Haya, and Hava are both breathing words. Haya literally is the sound of exhaling. Let's do this. Everybody take a deep breath. And release your breath. And what's the sound that it makes? Right? If it sounds like there's something wrong with you. Right? It makes this a normal exhale sounds like, and that is almost exactly what haya sounds like. It is in the Hebrew, it's the literal sound of an exhale. Hava is the Hebrew verb to breathe. You see where I'm going with this? So how do you pronounce this word? And this is interesting. It's one of the things that you see. It's like a rabbi will get asked, how do you pronounce the name of God? And he'll tell you the name of God is constituted by 3 letters that are all breathing sounds, by 2 words, both of which are either the breathing sound or the word for breath, and they're aspirational, which means they have to be expressed with a breath. You can't pronounce the letters in a word unless there's another consonant to fill the gap between them. You should not be able to pronounce the name God because it's only breathing sounds. There are no strong consonants, and the Hebrew language doesn't work that way. And that's pretty profound because almost always, matter of fact, every reference I found, that after they tell you that you can't pronounce it, they then take a stab at pronouncing it, which is ridiculous. Well, you can't pronounce it. It isn't pronounceable. The Hebrew won't support it. But the way I would pronounce it is, right? But what you find out, so when someone says, well, the name of God is Jehovah, and I'm going to tell you, no, it's not. That is a convention used for convenience to say his name. It is not the way his name would be pronounced, right? And there's a lot of people that be very upset at me saying that. But when you go look at the research of the rabbis, it's conclusive. There's no debate on that question. There's only debate on that question for someone who happens to be in the Jehovah's Witnesses or in other groups that claim that as the sound. Yahweh really doesn't do it either, because we make wa a strong consonant, and it's not. It's a breathing sound. So what is the sound of the name of God? Our breathing is. And this should both be profound as a concept, as well as quite obvious when you look at all of the other breathing discussion that's happening here. God first spoke his name into Adam, and with every breath we take, we speak God's name. We are an expression of God in our very life, in our very breath. And I find that to be amazing, right? I find that to be amazing. I speculate myself that the yod is an inhale breath from ancient Hebrew, and that the vav is an inhale breath because the name is yod, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. I don't know that to be true, but it just seems to me that the very first act of breathing of Adam was an inhale. And that would make sense that God would do that. But in any case, all 4 of these letters are breathing sounds. And when we breathe, we're saying God's name. So in conclusion, God reveals himself as the existent one, the only one who is. God is in all time at one time. That means he not only spans all time and sees all things, but what we know as a moment can be an infinity to him, because he's not moving through time, he's in time. God is the source and destination of all breath, thus all life is in him. Yahweh or Yahweh combines both names, the Haya and the Hava. He's the one creator, the giver of all life and our every breath. And this is what I would propose to you. When you have 5,789 references of Yod He Vav He in the Holy Scriptures. And that's just the Old Testament. That God is calling our attention not to the name as a moniker, but to remember when we see the name written, to remind ourselves, He's the Creator, the existent one who gives me life and from whom I just took that breath. Right? And to remember that because He knows He's giving you that breath right now. And it is His gift to you and to me. So may our God, who gives you life and breath, the very essence of your every breathing, be with you and bless you in everything that you do, everything that you say, and in pursuing Him in all your ways. God bless you all. I will at this time now close with prayer. Let's all bow our heads.
Or Cam, just want to check if anybody had any questions or comments for you before we close.
Oh, okay. Well, I can take the questions and comments after I pray, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Perfect. Father, we come before you at this time and we just praise your great and your holy name. It is our hope and desire that your kingdom will come soon and that we would have a place in it. We ask that you would lead and guide every one of us and strengthen us and give us courage to walk in your ways. We thank you for the revelation of your name and the understanding of it and the insight into it. And we ask that as we meditate upon it, that you would continue to open yourself up to us. And that with every breath we take, we would bring you praise, glory, and honor. We know it's your very plan that you would have your honor and your glory fill this entire earth as the waters cover the sea. And we ask that we can be part of that family in that day. We ask that your hand would be over every one of us and protect us and keep us to the day of our joining your family. And Father, we just thank you for all these many gifts and these many blessings. And in Jesus' name we pray all these things. Amen. All right. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
I had one.
Yeah, I like the fireworks.
Yeah, you like fireworks?
Yeah.
I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, I had one. You mentioned that the word Lord is sometimes in all uppercase, and then sometimes it's in just a capital letter and the rest lowercase. Did you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's a convention. So what I mean by that is that from the time of the earliest translations when they started using a replacement for the name of God, they knew that the word wasn't expressive enough to indicate that the word under it was actually God. So the way that they made that known was to capitalize. So you'll find that in virtually every English text as well as other languages. They always all cap whatever word fits in that space. So I'm studying Swahili, and the word for Lord is Bwana, and Bwana is all capped because it follows the convention of capitalizing whatever word is used for the name of God. The lower cases can be used in terms of two people are talking to each other and one refers to the other as Lord, then it would be lowercase or a capital L with lowercase letters. So if you look at your scriptures and you find Lord where it's referring to God, you'll see that it's in all caps typeface.
Every time.
Every time.
What about Lord in like
Star Wars.
Lord Vader. Yeah, that would be a capital L, lowercase O-R-D, right?
Yeah.
So,
Was there a pre-existing convention, or what was the convention pre-King James? I mean, you know, I'm not talking about Latin here, but in English, how did, before that, I mean, how, in talking about God, did they refer?
so yeah, you'd have to go before English. So English has always had this convention. The Germanic had the convention. You get about the 2nd century before Jesus's time. There was a progression towards this way of thinking. So there are scraps of text, both Greek and Hebrew, that are ancient, that have parts of God's name actually written in. Like the Hebrew would definitely have it. But there are pieces of the Septuagint, which is the ancient Hebrew text, where the earliest versions had a Greek equivalent to the literal name of God. And as those documents, as they became more and more closer to our time, like during Jesus's time, they had already moved away from the literal representation of the name of God as Yahweh or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and they started going Alpha and Omega, and then they started moving from Alpha and Omega, which has in the Greek mind, Alpha and Omega means for all time, right? So the name of God at that point to a Greek mind would be the one who's in all time, literally. But then they started changing from that, and they started using Kyrios, which means Lord, in the Greek as well. It has the idea, but Greek don't have a title system the way that the British do. So Lord wouldn't be the lowest on their title, but it just used that, and they also, for a brief period of time, would blend Adonai, which means sovereign. They would take those letters and they would join them with the Yahweh, and that's where you get Yehovah spelled out. It's the joining of those two words. So the actual Jehovah word we know is a word that they use to mask the word Yahweh so that they wouldn't have to say or write the word because it was too holy for them. So that has progressed from before the time of Jesus. The challenge is, in our time, you would never even know there's an Elohim underneath it if you didn't have a concordance of some kind to see the language. So everybody, if you just read the Bible by itself, you'd think that his name is God or his name is Lord. And both of those are not names, they're both titles. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question, and it's quite a good study. I mean, I gave you a short lesson on it. It's quite an interesting study because when you see where it's progressed from, there are even ancient, some of the oldest New Testament writings where there are scraps of passages that are the oldest scraps we have that actually have God's name in them, where it looked like they wanted to write in the earliest versions the Yahweh in the text. But that is since there are only a couple of scraps with that in them. Everything else is back to Kyrios, and they've masked it again. It was like the further we go, the further we get from his literal name being in the text. Any other questions? They're great questions.
All right, well, thank you very much, Cam. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, 6:05 your time, so you still have time to treat your wife to a Valentine's dinner.
Yeah, she's cooking for me. What's she doing? All right.
You got tomorrow. You're on tomorrow.
That's right. It's mine tomorrow. All right.
Okay.
Well, God bless, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.